Okay, good morning. I am Hans-Eirik Olav, and I'm here today to talk to a guest from the United States of America, Robert David Steele. First of all, welcome to Norway.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. This is my second visit.
That's good. Well, you were here last time, a few years ago.
A Norwegian citizen took an interest in my work when the Danish government paid for me to lecture the Danish government, and he brought me up here for dinner, and that was my introduction. And then he introduced me to some other people, and that led to my being recommended for a Nobel Peace Prize, which led to my coming to give some lectures.
Very
so
good.
This was a Norwegian citizen that brought me to Norway the first time.
Very good. Let's start by having a look at your book. I'll just show the book to the audience. It's called Intelligence for Earth, Clarity, Diversity, Integrity, and Sustainability. And I'd like to start off with just reading very quickly on the inside of the book.
Whatever you wish.
We'll start with that. You say here that a massive cultural tsunami is sweeping around the world as the 5 billion poor acquire information and communication technologies, and the 1 billion rich realize that the era of empire, rule of by and for the few, is over. Happily, this is a revolution in human affairs that will be non-violent for the simple reason that no redistribution of existing wealth can match the infinite new wealth that the entrepreneurial poor can create for themselves when empowered with ICT, that is information and communication technologies.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a pretty rich statement, and I'd like to start off by having you explain your open source, what should I say, ideology or thinking to the audience who haven't heard about the...
I'm glad to do that. I should start by saying that I'm a recovering spy. I was a Marine Corps infantry officer. I haven't been to Norway on Marine Corps exercises, but I've been everywhere else. And I then became a CIA spy. And I spied across Latin America. And then I created the Marine Corps Intelligence Command. And that's when I discovered that 95% of the information that our politicians and our commanders and our citizens and our businessmen need is not secret, not in English, not online, and not known to the intelligence services. The intelligence services spend too much time spying and not actually thinking, and they focus almost exclusively on war and terrorism. They don't focus on poverty, infectious disease, environmental degradation, genocide, other atrocities, which includes pedophilia, which is a terrible evil across the world, where child protective services are part of the evil, taking kids away from families. And then, of course, crime. Legalized crime in the United States is very, very big, and I suspect it's big in Europe as well, and perhaps even in Norway. So I started the open source intelligence revolution by basically saying, don't send a spy where a schoolboy can go. And the problem that we have is that we have 8 information tribes, ICT tribes, if you will. So you have academia, you have civil society with labor unions and religions, you have commerce, especially small business, government, especially local. I'm going to Tana Bro this weekend at the invitation of a Norwegian citizen, which I'm very glad to have. And then you have law enforcement, media, military, and nonprofit. They're all in their little stovepipes. They're all in their little dreamlands, and they don't cross-fertilize. They don't share information. They don't make sense together. They don't have a strategic analytic model. So I essentially invented, and this book is the culmination. This is the 8th of 8 books. Okay, this is the last book on intelligence. I invented the process of 21st century intelligence, which focuses on decision support, which is an output, rather than on spying, which is an input. And the key difference between the old days of spying and the new days of open source intelligence is that in the old days, the spies were used to do evil things for the president or the prime minister. Today, intelligence has to concern every citizen. because what Norway buys, the decisions Norway makes, for example, Norway should never have gone to war in Libya. It should never have supported the Americans in invading Iraq. It should have known that the Americans were telling 935 lies in order to justify the invasion of Iraq. So Norway got suckered into that. And the reason it got suckered into that is because the Norwegian politicians were accepting the American declarations at face value when they were in fact lies. So we're now reaching an era of collective intelligence where self-governance is now possible. And we're moving toward an era where every citizen has to be a part of the collective for the collective to be intelligent. If you have all the citizens off to the side and you say, well, we'll tell you what you need to know and we will make the decisions over here, you're in very bad shape. Because the decisions that are made over here are made in a very small closed box where money rather than information determines what decision is made. So that was the open source intelligence part. What got me recommended here in Norway by John Kalvik for consideration for the Nobel, which is, I don't think it's ever possible, but was the idea of open source everything engineering. It's possible to lift up the 5 billion poor and keep them at home. I predicted this problem 20 years ago. The reason we have a massive move of millions of refugees into Southern Europe, and in Denmark last year I said to the government, you're going to have them here in Denmark in 10 years, okay? The reason we have this massive move of people is because we have allowed the Americans to bomb their cities and to destroy their societies. Syria is a regime change operation by the Americans for the American banks. It has absolutely no value at all for the average Norwegian citizen, the average European citizen. It certainly has no value for the Syrians whose lives are being destroyed. All right. So what we can do with open source everything engineering is give every person in Syria, in Yemen, and Somalia a pressed brick house, unlimited free energy with solar energy, unlimited desalinated clean water for drinking and cooking and bathing and growing things, including an aquaponics industry with no pesticides. We can give them free open source medicine. We can give them free open source internet and communications. And I can do all of that for $500 per person one time. I actually did the calculations for 1 million Somalis for the United Nations. For $500 million, I can keep all of the Somalis that are now in refugee resettlement camps. I can move them back to Somalia, put them in an uncontested area that has dirt, sunlight, and seawater. And I can make them happy so they don't move to Norway. All right, this is part of global politics, but our politicians don't think in those terms.
No. I don't know if you're familiar with the documentary called The Four Horsemen.
No, I've heard of it.
But in that documentary, the documentary has won several prizes, a lot of prizes. There is an ex-CIA officer who's worked with terrorists for many years. And he is quoted saying in the documentary that a couple of things. He says that I've never met a terrorist that wouldn't rather be home tending to his farm. And he also went on to say that, basically they are over here terrorizing, doing terrorist acts because we are over there.
Well, that's true. And in fact, I was one of 2 CIA officers assigned terrorism full-time in the 1980s. I was one of the first 2. I had one half of the world, the other one had the other half of the world. And I will tell you that we are creating the terrorists. For example, the CIA is doing drone assassination operations that are killing thousands of women and children as well as old men. And they're doing it with impunity. They don't have a legitimate basis for targeting drone strikes. In fact, I've just finished reviewing 3 books for the top journal in our field, Intelligence and National Security. It's published out of London. And in my review, I find that CIA's drone assassination operations are not just illegal, they're unconstitutional. And they're a violation of every possible international treaty that we have, even when we have permission from governments, as in Somalia. Those are illegal permissions, and the Somali people are being treated to war crimes by the CIA. Terrorism is something that the United States used against the British in the American Revolution. It's something that the Israelis used against the Arabs in World War II. It is a tactic. It is not a threat. A terrorist, by definition, is someone who has nowhere else to go, who has no other course of action. And in fact, we find that with NATO, we have fake terrorists, Operation Gladio. It's now known that the red flag threat in Italy was not a real terrorist threat. It was neo-Nazi actors who were creating terrorism in order to push Italy toward a fascist government. Mm-hmm. The same is true in the United States. There's an excellent book called The Terror Factory, which talks about how 175 terrorism convictions in the United States all started with the FBI paying money to an informant to begin the terrorist operation. Mm-hmm. All right, so we're creating terrorism. I'm one of the leading published authorities on false flag operations. I did a false flag operation for the CIA.
Does what you say give credence to the allegations by some that the United States government is in fact financing ISIS?
The actual truth of the matter, as I understand it, is the Saudi Arabian government is financing ISIS. The United States government is completely complicit, and elements of the CIA and elements of the Pentagon's Joint Special Operations Group trained and equipped elements of ISIS. And remember, a large part of ISIS comes from the Sunni officers that we disenfranchised when we invaded Iraq and demilitarized the Ba'ath Party. That was a very bad decision. We should never have invaded Iraq. We should never have dismantled the military. Believe it or not, Dick Cheney was not told that invading Iraq would free the 80% of the Iraqi people who are Shiites and like Iran. I mean, I cannot overstate to you the stupidity of the American government in the sense that they do things for oil and water and money. They don't do things for good reasons.
Well, I remember seeing a videotaped interview with the former General Wesley Clark, I believe, who was in a position of power and who is no longer in a position of power. And in the interview, he says that he was at the Pentagon.
Yes.
He was called into a meeting, and in the meeting, another general told him,
we're going to invade 5 countries.
Yeah. Cheney and Bush and that administration were telling the generals at the Pentagon that in the next 5 years we're going to invade 7 countries. And the conversation between Wesley Clark, according to Wesley Clark, was that these people are absolutely crazy. But if you look at what happened afterwards, isn't that precisely what's happened?
It has happened, and I'll make 2 comments. First off, your Norwegian citizens can find General Clark on YouTube saying this and saying that there has been a foreign policy coup in the United States. We have the same problem today that Lyndon Baines Johnson had in Vietnam, which is the guns or butter problem. And in fact, in the United States, guns run the economy, the political economy. One of the main reasons we're in the Middle East today is because Goldman Sachs made bad futures bets. They made bets that oil would go over $200 a barrel. And when those bets don't materialize, the fastest way for Goldman Sachs to make tens of billions of dollars and not lose money is to start a war in the Middle East so that the oil price goes up. Norwegian citizens need to understand that everything is manipulated. The foreign exchange rate is manipulated. Interest rates are manipulated. Wars are manipulated in order to impact on stock prices in this casino roulette game that we have out there. Now,
so nothing's really changed then since the first central bank in the world was created in 1694 by King George.
Banks and merchants have always run governments. But let me make another point to you, which is about integrity. In the United States of America, we have a very dishonest officer corps. There's actually a publication. I work part-time for the Strategic Studies Institute of the U.S. Army, and they are one of the last places where true, honest thought is published in the entire U.S. government. They published a monograph called Lying to Ourselves, Dishonesty in the Military Profession. And it's a survey of Army officers who essentially confirm that they will tell any lie they need to in order to get promoted. And so what you have in this instance where the generals accepted illegal civilian orders is a loss of integrity. What they should have done was said no and gone to Congress and asked for the impeachment of Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld. In the U.S. Constitution, and other constitutions are similar, we all swear an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, domestic as well as foreign. Integrity is the single most important word in the English language, in any language. Because what integrity means is that every citizen has a right to say no, enough, stop, I won't agree to this. And every general has an obligation on behalf of the citizens to say, no, I will not go to war on the basis of lies. I will not get Norwegian citizens killed or put at risk of death, because a lot of times the Norwegians are cosmetic, okay? All the Americans want is to be able to say, oh, the Norwegians support our policies. And the Norwegians may actually just be going for some realistic field exercise time. It is a failure of integrity to support an American elective war or an American regime change operation. It is a betrayal of the public trust in every possible sense of the word.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, there have been articles in Norwegian newspapers about the war in Libya and how the Norwegian government got involved. And in fact, there are accusations, whether they're correct or not, I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever find the evidence. But
we will find the evidence.
The accusation is that the Prime Minister of Norway at that time, Jens Stoltenberg, was actually received a text message or a phone call from Hillary Clinton, who was then in charge of things in the United States and who really wanted to go to war against Libya. At least that's what I...
Well, let me give you the details.
And the thing is that Jens Stoltenberg was... This is an accusation that I cannot confirm, but at least it says that Jens Stoltenberg agreed to do this, and he was promised that he would become the top honcho at NATO for doing this.
Has he become?
Yes, he has.
Interesting. What I know from my other sources and reading is that France is the country that decided to take down Libya. But Hillary Clinton, through the Clinton Foundation, received tens of millions of dollars from France, from Norway, in fact. The Clinton Foundation has contributed, which I think is very unwise. Norwegian citizens should be asking, why is the government of Norway giving Norwegian money to the Clinton Foundation, which in any given year gives no more than $5 million to actual charity?
What happens to the rest of the millions?
It's being stolen. Actually, it's billions. It's being stolen. The Clinton Foundation is the biggest organized crime family that I know of. And they are taking in money. For example, Hillary Clinton took money from the Russians to sell American uranium to Russia. She took money from the Saudi Arabians to sell Syria and Yemen to Saudi Arabia and to justify ISIS and protect ISIS. Hillary Clinton is probably the single most corrupt politician in U.S. history since Lyndon Baines Johnson. And as Secretary of State, money would come into the Clinton Foundation and U.S. support would go out. And it goes back to this coup that we've had. The banks and the neocons have insisted that they control war as a profit center in return for allowing very moderate and often badly designed public health and education and other initiatives to go forward. The United States is a war economy. And it's a war economy that is treating the people of the United States as ammunition and as fodder, okay? It's the people in the United States don't matter to the mandarins that are running the United States.
It's also a war economy that's running at a deficit of $1 trillion per year. And today is actually the 15th of March where you're hitting the debt ceiling. And the Congress, they're going to have to sit down and discuss whether to raise it.
Well, I hope they don't raise the debt ceiling. And I think that's one of the reasons that Donald Trump has been so aggressive about cutting the federal budget. Now, he's made some bad decisions also. And again, his giving more money to the military is an example of a bad decision. And it's also an example of a decision he might have felt he was forced to make because of the war economy. The reality about the American military is that we have a very expensive military that cannot fight and win wars. And Norway is foolish to buy anything from the Americans. The F-35, for example, is a piece of junk, and it kills pilots with the stealth chemicals. It can't loiter very long, it can't fly very far, it can't carry a heavy load, and it's optimized for a warm, non-humid day, which doesn't happen very often in Norway.
What I've heard is, and again, I'm not an expert in this matter, but I've read somewhere that if you put this F-35 fighters in the air for 30 minutes or an hour, whatever, it needs about 3 weeks on the ground for...
I believe that, and I'll tell you something, it also has problems in the rain. Okay, so when I came to Norway, I was hoping to talk to your defense people that do programming, because when I created the Marine Corps Intelligence Command, General Gray, the Commandant, asked me to create an intelligence center that would support acquisition, what we buy, what we build. I will tell you straight up, I think your defense acquisition process is corrupt because they're not making decisions based on evidence. They're making decisions based on political mandates. Mm-hmm. I can't say this more clearly. It is criminally insane for Norway to buy the F-35. The Russians will kill that airplane very quickly. It is a rotten airplane. It is way too much money, and it won't survive. And in fact, it's not just...
Will it ever be delivered to Norway?
The short answer is maybe. One of the things that I'm hoping Donald Trump will do is cancel the F-35 if he's not impeached or assassinated in the near term. But coming back to Norway and coming back to this whole issue of war against the Russians, you know, this is all a fabrication. I mean, the Swedes were making up Russian submarines in order to get the public afraid of the Russians. It's not the Russians that have 1,000 military bases all over the seas, all over the world. It's the Americans. And by the way, the reason we have 1,000 military bases is not for military power. They're lily pads for smuggling. That is how CIA smuggles gold, guns, drugs, cash, and small children for the elites in the United States. War is a profit center, not just for oil. War produces body parts. It produces orphans. It produces all kinds of human goods that can then be trafficked. And the banks rely on war and drugs for their cash flow, for their liquidity. This is something Michael Rupert wrote about very, very ably. So coming back to Norway, it seems to me, and the reason I came to Norway to give several speeches, Norway needs an open source intelligence center that is in the service of the public. In fact, in Denmark, they're very interested in the idea of a Nordic intelligence center. One that has the Nordic nations. I learned the difference between Scandinavian and Nordic, so we'll include the Finns, okay? Mm-hmm. So a Nordic intelligence center would have all of the countries together, but it would also have all 8 tribes together. So academics, commerce, the law enforcement, the media, everybody would come together and it would be completely transparent. It would essentially be the people's intelligence agency. And it would assure that every government decision is based on evidence and that the public agrees that the government decision to buy an aircraft or whatever is legitimate. Personally, I think there needs to be a Nordic aircraft industry. There used to be one. There needs to be a Nordic aircraft industry that builds jet aircraft suitable for the northern climate against not just Russia, but the Germans.
Well, you know that the Swedish Saab, they were making airplanes and they were actually competing with the F-35s to get the contract, but they never got it.
They didn't get it for corrupt reasons. I'm quite sure the Saab offering was better. Mm-hmm. I'm absolutely certain of this.
But you know, the United States and the United States government is sort of like a big brother to the rest of the world, or they would like to be. And in Norway, of course, it would take quite a bit of courage for the Norwegian politicians and the government to sort of stand up and say that we're not going to do business the way we've been doing business for such a long time. We are very close with the United States.
Well, you're close with the corrupt politicians of the United States. You're not close with the United States. The real people of the United States are very angry right now. Donald Trump was elected in part because the public in the United States is becoming aware that we have a two-party tyranny. We don't actually have a democracy in the United States. We have a two-party tyranny, the Republican and Democratic parties. They're two wings of the same bird. They produce the same poop, okay? One bird, two wings, same poop, all right? Totally corrupt. The Democratic Party controls 17% of the eligible voters. The Republican Party controls 13%. They exclude all others from the electoral process. I had to run for president in 2012 for the Reform Party to learn that we have 8 political parties in the United States that are accredited for federal funding. The Constitution Party, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the Natural Law Party, the Reform Party, and the Socialist Party are the other 6 parties that are blocked. 50% of our voters consider themselves independent. They are blocked. They're not allowed to be part of the electoral system. It is a criminal conspiracy, the way we run the United States of America. Now, Pizzagate and the leaks from the Democratic National Committee, from John Podesta's email, who, by the way, that was a Romanian taxi driver. It was not Russian intelligence. Guccifer is a Romanian taxi driver. We had him in Virginia, and we were interrogating him, and we determined that he was a Romanian taxi driver. The Russians did not hack the election. So we sent him back to Romania, and he's there now. And then the Anthony Weiner laptop, which produced emails that demonstrated that Hillary Clinton was deeply engaged in pedophilia, in transnational crime, in pay-to-play quid pro quos,
For the Clinton
and charity fraud, and of course charity fraud. And so what has happened in the United States in the last 120 days is 3 sacred oxen have been gored. The first is the secret intelligence community. It has lost all credibility. Here in Norway, I'm quite sure your secret intelligence community is receiving money from the American Secret Intelligence Services that is not being declared to your parliament and to your prime minister. Okay? There is a vassal relationship between Norwegian intelligence and American intelligence that is not good.
A lot of people would say, prove it.
I would say that's up to the Norwegians to prove it. And I could prove it very easily. You give me your top 10 intelligence officers for 30 days and I will prove it. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand.
Okay? These people will eventually realize they cannot tell a lie. Oh, by the way, I'm one of the people who is against torture. Torture doesn't work. What we do successfully after every big war is we create the equivalent of a Marriott courtyard. And we bring in our high-value prisoners, and they have a private room with bath, and they're treated very well, and they're fed very well, and their religious customs are honored. And we simply tell them, you got a choice. You can walk out of here with a passport for any country in the world and $1 million, or you can walk out of here as a corpse. Yeah. Which would you like? We're not going to torture you. Okay? This is very straightforward. Yeah. I absolutely guarantee you that if your Norwegian intelligence officers were put to a public test, they would confess, and confess quickly.
Okay. I'd like to get back just for a moment to the topic we started on, which was what's happening in the Middle East, and particularly in Syria, with this refugee crisis, which we all can agree on is a terrible.
It's going to get worse.
Yeah, it's terrible. The human suffering is absolutely beyond anything we've ever seen before, perhaps.
World War II.
Going back to World War II, yeah. And we now see this exodus of people coming out of Syria and the Middle East and, crossing borders and getting into Europe.
Because Libya is no longer there. Yeah. Libya was stopping them before.
And we have, because of this, we have sort of, to put it simply, we have sort of 2 fronts in Europe now. One saying, get them the hell out of here. Or no, we have to take them in, we have to do the humane thing.
All along.
How do we solve that problem in a humane way?
The first humane consideration must be the good of the indigenous public. The Norwegian citizens should be the first priority. The French and German citizens should be the first priority. Angela Merkel has been a vassal, and I say that in the worst possible way, of the United States of America. And people need to understand that when someone says we need to do something in a humane way, they're actually picking their pocket. Okay? They're stealing from them. Because that's code for, we want you to let us do what we want to do, never mind the cost to you. Every country has a right to self-determination, to full employment for all of its citizens, to proper health care, to no threat of infectious disease from incoming groups that are carrying all kinds of diseases, and so forth. Again, this comes back to the future of 21st century intelligence. I will repeat that there are 10 high-level threats and there are 12 core policies that every country needs to consider. The problem is that the Norwegian intelligence services don't do intelligence. They simply support political decisions. Okay? If they were doing intelligence, they would be saying our highest priority must be to keep foreigners out who bring with them problems. We must address poverty and infectious disease and so forth, and we must address it at its root. The root is not Syria. The root is Washington, D.C. and New York City and the city of London. Mm-hmm. That's root. That's the root of all evil.
So okay. We're back to my point about, or the guy from the CIA point about, they are coming over here because we are over there.
Yes, and
we are creating havoc in their country.
But it's also deeper than that, because if you look at, let's take the health industry, for example. Every industry across the United States of America is 50% waste, and it's totally corrupt. Now let's take the health industry as an example, because this impacts to some extent on Europe. There's no price list in the United States of America for health. No. There's no given price for an appendectomy. The price changes depending on who you are, how much you make, what state you live in, what insurance plan you're on, and just how corrupt the politicians in that state are. An appendectomy, for example, could cost anywhere from $5,000 in one state, a small, poor state, to $90,000 in California. Similarly, with pharmaceuticals, many of which kill people. Okay, we don't have a proven quality control capability in the U.S. government. The Food and Drug Administration and the Center for Disease Control are both criminal organizations that are bought and paid for by the industries they're supposed to supervise. Okay, so our medications will cost anywhere from $10 to $1,000. And there's no oversight of this. There's no control of this. The same is true for energy, for housing, for education. The prices are all over the place, and there's no quality control. So what people need to understand is that the acme of skill in the future is going to be a combination of the education of the public, the intelligence function, generally done by the government, and the research function done by the private sector. Now I'll just conclude with my key point. We have a concept of scientific reductionism and intellectual property law in the West that has made it too expensive to take care of everybody. So we are deliberately marginalizing 80% of the public in order to give the 20% of the public that can afford to their John Deere tractors and all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. Open source everything engineering can give everybody a full quality of life at 10% of the cost of the existing industrial paradigm. Open source everything engineering is about generic medicines. It's about inexpensive operations. It's about preventive and natural health.
But isn't the problem associated with open source that you're in fact then challenging the establishment and the money people?
Yes.
In a very adverse way.
Yes.
And since they run things, by and large, how are you going to make the change? How will the change come about?
Public education is key. And there's no amount of money that can overcome everyone voting against them. The problem is getting everyone to understand that they need to vote against them. What has happened in the United States now is that the public has suddenly woken up and realized that they have been cheated ever since John F. Kennedy was assassinated. John F. Kennedy was the last honest president in the United States of America. or the last effective president. Ever since Kennedy, all subsequent presidents have been essentially owned as puppets for the deep state. That certainly includes the Bushes and Obama and the Clintons, okay? They were criminal co-conspirators with the deep state, which is the Rothschilds, the banks, the two-party tyranny, and then the corporations and the industrial complex and so forth. We're at a point in time now, and I'm a huge believer in truth and reconciliation. It is not my purpose to exercise vindictive justice against a few bankers or pedophiles or whatever. What's more important is to have the truth come out so that the public is educated, so that the public now demands a proper government and a proper commerce and so forth. My version of truth and reconciliation is everyone gets the truth, no one goes to jail. I mean, the two top people I would like to interrogate publicly before they die are George Bush Sr., who was a party to the John F. Kennedy assassination. He was a non-official cover officer for the CIA. He was part of the deal. And Dick Cheney, who hijacked the American presidency and has literally been the Adolf Hitler of this generation. He has created more chaos, more death and disease and destruction than anyone before him other than Stalin and Hitler.
Well, did you know that Prescott Bush, that's the grandfather of George W. Bush,
right,
was in fact instrumental in financing Hitler Germany at some point?
Yes, but Prescott Bush was a servant to the Rothschilds, okay? And in fact, you make an important point which all Norwegians need to understand, which is wars don't happen unless the banks agree to finance them. The banks always finance both sides of the war. And they use war to make deals for natural resources and so forth. Libya was a French action because they wanted a better price on oil and Gaddafi wouldn't give it to them.
So nothing's changed then since Morgan convinced Wilson to enter the war, the First World War. And of course Napoleon and Wellington was also financed by these same people, or group of people you might say. At least that's what the alternative history books tell us.
Well, it's good that you mention alternative history because one of the problems we have with our educational system is that it perpetuates the lies. It doesn't teach people critical thinking. It doesn't teach them how to do their own homework. I mean, I'm thrilled. This weekend I'm going up to Tanabro, okay? And I'm spending the weekend in Tanabro and I'm talking to some citizens in the new school hall. There's apparently a lot of people that are interested in having me talk. And I'll be talking about everything from 9/11 to who killed Kennedy to why Donald Trump's wife is still in New York. I happen to know the answer, okay? And what I really admire is that I received an email from a citizen, a plain Norwegian citizen, a carpenter, okay, who's also a guitarist. And he sent me an email. He said, hey, we're up here in the far north and you're down there in Oslo with all the rich people. But if you'd like to come to Tanabro, there's some people here who would like to know what you think. So I'm paying my own way and I'm going to spend the weekend there. And what this demonstrates to me is that a single average Norwegian citizen is able to think for himself and is able to get at the truth and is able to get an old American spy to come to Tanabro. That's very, very cool.
So we can thank the internet for that.
You can thank the internet for that. The internet has a lot of problems. It is not yet helping people to share information. The internet is perhaps at the 4th grade level in its development. It doesn't have the tools for thinking. It doesn't have the tools, for example, every Norwegian citizen should be able to discover, as the Danish citizens just did, that their government has mysteriously stolen 300 million kroner and it's disappeared. Where did it go? Well, nobody's going to answer the Norwegian citizens that question, but it's within the power of the Norwegian citizens if they focus to find that money, okay? Yeah. So we have a long ways to go, but education of the citizen and self-education of the citizen. Right now the citizen is all alone. The government is not working for the citizen. The corporation is not working for the citizen.
But there are some powers out there, some pretty powerful forces at least, trying to educate the citizen. We have Snowden, of course, who did what he did. And we also have WikiLeaks with Julian Assange. Would you say to take WikiLeaks, who
That's
are
a good-
distributing a lot of information that I personally think is good for the citizens to see,
Right.
to understand how governments work. What would you say about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and their quest to sort of educate and
Let me say that that is the nature of education going forward. But let me start by saying that I testified. I was an invited witness for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan when he ran the congressional investigation into government secrecy and too much secrecy. And the bottom line on secrecy is not used to protect secrets from the Russians. It's used to protect politicians and their lies from the Norwegians. Okay, I'm deadly serious about this. The purpose of secrecy is to allow the government to screw the public and get away with it. That's why every Norwegian should be opposed to secrecy. And the Americans are imposing secrets on the Norwegians as a way of they bribe the Norwegians with money, the Norwegian government with money, and then they say, but you must agree to tell these lies and we're going to keep it a secret that they're lies. One of the beauties of open source intelligence is there are no secrets and therefore there are no lies. Okay?
You're sounding a bit like Thomas Jefferson here. You know, give the power back to the people.
Well, it's funny you say that because I have been told that if Donald Trump does not listen to us, we're forming a new coalition, and I may well run for president in 2020 with Cynthia McKinney as my vice president, and Dennis Kucinich, and Ron Paul, and Jesse Ventura, and Ralph Nader. What no one has ever done before is brought together all of the people who oppose the way things are done. Everyone has been divided and conquered. So yes, Thomas Jefferson, the founding fathers, and power to the people, this is very, very important. But let me go forward on WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks destroyed the Democratic Party, and it destroyed Hillary Clinton with the truth. One of the problems Donald Trump has today is that WikiLeaks is about to destroy the Republican Party with the truth. I expect to see not only a number of resignations, but some suicides in the leadership of the two-party tyranny in the United States of America. There are some people there who have been bribed and blackmailed because the CIA and NSA and the Mossad, Jeffrey Epstein is a Mossad agent. He created a no-name hotel in New York plus Lolita Island in order to capture U.S. politicians on video raping 13-year-old girls and boys. Okay? So pedophilia on videotape is the next big thing from WikiLeaks. We're beyond emails now.
You know, this is so incredible, it's almost beyond belief.
Beyond belief is Donald Trump winning the election.
Yeah.
We're in a new era now. The old empire is breaking apart. Deutsche Bank is about to go bankrupt, okay? The whole system is collapsing. And the only thing we're going to have left is ourselves and what we know and the trust and confidence between neighbors so that we will learn how to feed ourselves without a supermarket, okay? We're moving into a very, very difficult area. But going back to this thing about WikiLeaks and the pedophiles and the Republican Party, the public is also learning now that the mainstream media is really the fake news media. In the United States, we call CNN the crap news network. Okay? Crap is in poop. The crap news network.
Yeah, I understand.
They're completely dishonest.
Is that a reason why their ratings is sort of like down to 6%?
It's not just them. The New York Times is a failing newspaper. The Washington Post is a failing newspaper. What's happened is that this house of cards in which the deep state provided a narrative to the media. I mean, even the 9/11 media narrative, that was provided to them in advance. Some of them started their stories too soon, before the planes hit the buildings. Okay, so we've had this house of cards, and it's collapsing. And when it collapses, it's going to hit the ground. And when it hits the ground, the people who will be standing above the cards are we the people. So we're about to enter, I think, a new era. And I will go back to this whole immigration issue. Spain had to evict the Muslims and the Jews from Spain. I think it was the 16th century. And the reason they had to evict them was because they were not assimilating. They were not becoming a part of society, and they were not being productive members of society. They were a drain on society. I believe the day will come when Norway has to conclude that no foreigner, no foreign corporation should be allowed to own Norwegian property. Norwegian land, Norwegian buildings should all be owned by Norwegians. And foreigners should be welcome as candidates for citizenship, but they should only be granted citizenship if they assimilate and are able to become productive members of society. Mm-hmm. That's not true of most of the refugees that are coming out of these contested areas that the Americans created.
That's an interesting thought, but getting back to the refugee crisis, which is an immediate crisis, how should one tackle that crisis?
I'm so glad you asked that. One of the reasons I'm here is because the fastest way to tackle the refugee crisis is to send them home, but send them home with open source everything engineering. One of the problems with the United Nations and the entire donation system is it's very corrupt. Out of all of the billions of dollars that are donated to the UN, 80 to 90% of those dollars are used up in paying for bureaucracies and salaries and going through the motions. They don't get to the village. My vision would have a Nordic or a European open source intelligence center with an open source everything engineering center, which would create technologies for free solar energy, free water desalination, free internet. There's already the open BTS, open base transceiver station. I can provide free cellular communications for 100,000 people with one $10,000 unit that basically provides cellular for everybody, okay? We need to invest in the Middle East. We need to stop supporting dictators and Israel. The American taxpayer is paying $30,000 a year for every Israeli man, woman, and child, and most of that money is going into military spending and the repression of the Palestinians, which produces refugees. Mm-hmm. Norwegians should be very angry at Israel. They should be very angry at Saudi Arabia. They should be very angry at the United States. They should not be angry at Russia or Iran or even Turkey. Turkey has its issues, but Turkey is now finding a space where it's growing.
Mainstream media, also in Norway,
portray Putin as a warmonger.
I have to be blunt. Putin has his flaws because he's an autocratic leader in a country that was almost destroyed by the United States. We actually operated what was called the Gold War. We spent over $200 billion from 1998. Buzzy Krongard from Deutsche Bank and Brown and Root was at the CIA, sitting next to George Tenet, managing this Gold War against Russia. The purpose of the Gold War was to destroy the Russian economy so that it could never afford a military. It almost worked. So Putin is a survivor who is struggling. I have to say very clearly, anybody that thinks that Putin is a warmonger compared to the United States is not thinking clearly and does not have good sources of information. It is the United States that has moved military troops into Eastern Europe. It is the United States that is trying to sell weapons to Eastern Europe. It is the United States under Philip Breedlove that was trying to start a war with Russia. It's the United States that is saying, oh, Crimea, that's an invasion. Never mind that Crimea belonged to Russia for hundreds of years, okay? Americans don't do history. Americans don't do the truth. Americans do banking and politics and invasions with military troops. And by the way, our cost has been huge. We have over 75,000 amputees among our veterans in the United States. Nobody thinks about the true cost. That's the other thing about my vision is true cost economics. Mm-hmm. Every government policy, every commercial product has to be evaluated on the basis of true cost economics. What does this really cost? How much water is in this product? How much fuel? How many toxins are being exuded into the atmosphere? How much taxes did this company pay or not pay? What regulations does this company obey or not obey? How much child labor was used in this product? We don't do all of that. So for me, the solution to the Middle East is first, stop supporting dictators. The United States, there are over 40 dictators in the world. The United States loves all of them, except for two, North Korea and Cuba, okay? And Cuba is a good example of the ideological insanity of the United States. The Mexican president was asked by an American president about 10 years ago, he said, why can't you support our embargoes on Cuba and our declaration of Cuba as a threat to humanity? And the Mexican president looked at the American president and said, Mr. President, if I declare Cuba to be a threat to Mexican national security, 40 million Mexicans will die laughing. I can't do this, okay? So, I mean, what is astonishing to me is that how the Norwegian citizens, who are very well educated, if you really compare them to many other countries, they've lost the ability to find their own way. They are spoon-fed lies by the mainstream media. They're spoon-fed by the government. I had an interview request from the government's NKR or whatever it is.
NRK.
NRK invited me to do an interview, and as soon as they found out that I was critical of NATO and critical of the Nobel Peace Price, they canceled the interview. You are doing what they should have done.
Well, I'm not surprised that they canceled the interview. I'm not surprised. But
I was surprised that they asked for it in the first place, which told me that they had not done their homework. Had they done their homework, I'm the most publicized spy on the internet. And everything I've ever written is out there open and for free. So they didn't do their homework. They invited me. Then they did their homework, and then they disinvited me. That should tell the Norwegians everything they need to know about NKR.
yeah. You know, Paul Craig Roberts is a very distinguished professor of economics. He was also part of the Reagan administration at some point. He's very critical of what the United States is doing across the world. And one of his things is if I understand him correctly, he says there are similarities between the coup that was once done in Nicaragua and the coup in the Ukraine, in the sense that this is all staged by...
It is staged.
The neoconservatives in Washington.
Well, you can even go further back. I mean, I start my history of coups with Iran and Guatemala. Iran had a democratic election, and CIA came in and ran a coup that it restored the Shah and created the secret police and basically destroyed relations between the people of Iran and the people of America for a half century. Iran is a very important, vibrant country and a great place to invest. And I think it's absolutely insane for us to be treating Iran as the devil. Okay, Saudi Arabia is the devil. Israel is the devil. Germany and France, for lacking ethics, are the little devils. Okay, Norway can do better. What we have out there is a world in which it's possible to achieve major changes in government with very minor investments in violence or information or money, because the public's not paying attention. In an open source world, everyone is paying attention all the time. And it's not possible to get away with this kind of stuff. And that's where I think we're moving. Let me say something about direct democracy. Right now, what we have is a broadcast environment in which millions of Norwegian citizens are depending on a one-to-many pipeline. So NKR speaks the truth, and all Norwegian citizens say, oh yes, that's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And then they go back to their dinner, okay? What hasn't happened is the cross-democratic lines, where people like Dag Peterson and Tana Bro can educate his citizens, and they can educate the citizens of Cardenas, who can then educate the citizens of Oslo, and you get this kind of vibrant democratic soup going. But we also don't have the citizens to the government channel, okay? Now, in the United States, I'm working with a couple of companies, but one of them in particular is called Pollmole, P-O-L-L-M-O-L-E, Pollmole. And what we're doing is we're developing an extreme democracy platform so that every citizen can not only have their opinion, but they can also receive education from multiple sources. And so when the mainstream media report comes in on the Russians or the enemy, They can then see 16 different sources in different languages. That's another problem with most countries, is they only do news in one language. And they only do research in one language. Okay, in Norway you do it in English and Norwegian. For every mainstream media report saying the Russians hacked the US election, I can find you 30 more credible reports that say no, they did not. But right now there's no way for the citizens to access those reports. And there's no architecture for the citizens to self-study and educate. So Paul Moll is going to try and create essentially a citizens' intelligence web, so that, for example, on agriculture, you can look up which foods have had Monsanto Roundup applied to them. Now, Norwegians like beer, okay? It should be very important to the Norwegians to understand that the beer industry refuses to buy wheat if Monsanto's Roundup has been applied to that wheat. The beer industry knows something very, very important, which is that Monsanto Roundup is poison, and it's poisoning humanity. And so what the Norwegians should do when they see that little factoid, beer, no Monsanto, they should then say, oh, well, then maybe we should have no Monsanto in our bread and all these other products, our spaghetti and so forth, okay? So we're a hair away. We're within 5 years of every citizen being an intelligence Minuteman, where the word intelligence is not about spies and secrecy, it's about decision support and critical thinking and loyal, ethical citizens working together to self-govern. This is a nightmare for every corrupt politician in Europe.
So what happens to the deep state and the bureaucracy that's part of it and running it when this happens? And can they stop it?
The short answer is the reason that I am so strong about truth and reconciliation is because you don't win by backing the jackals into a corner, okay? I don't want to push these people into a corner. The Rothschilds, for example, Lynn Rothschild was born in New Jersey, okay? And she married Lord Evelyn Rothschild, who's the senior Rothschild. Lynn Rothschild ran a conference on inclusive capitalism, and it was a complete failure because the only people she invited were the 1% of the 1%, okay? Bill Clinton was the token American. And so what we want to do is show them that we're not seeking to confiscate all their wealth except for property. All property should return to the community. Ecuador, for example, should own its own land and its own mines, and South Africa, the citizens should own the gold mines and the diamond mines and so forth, not private companies, okay? Netherlands has set a good example here. In the Netherlands, they own the natural gas. And the natural gas that is exploited by the Netherlands is exploited for the good of the people. In fact, that's what has paid for the Netherlands to have the best internet environment in the world. They have the deepest internet and the most effective internet in the world, far beyond what China and Singapore and others have tried to do. So citizens need to take control of their land and their property and their natural resources. They need to re-engage with the concept of citizenship. Who is a citizenship? Who is a citizen? What does it mean to be a citizen? And frankly, nobody should be allowed in the country who is not able to pass the test of citizenship, okay? Now, that comes with a dual responsibility. On the one hand, you have to maintain your national integrity. And by the way, I agree with the Russian foreign minister who said recently that the Western way is dying. And what's emerging, there's a director in Russia who's talking about how nationalism and holistic nationalism is re-emergent. I think we're seeing the return of the nation, not the state. The state is being retired because the state has been corrupt and has badly managed, but the nation is coming back up. The dual responsibility is to end all 42 dictators. The 42 dictators on the planet, there's a book called Breaking the Axis of Evil by Ambassador Mark Palmer. The United States of America and the bankers are the primary source of support for all dictators on the planet. So we need to eliminate the dictators. We need to eliminate investments in militaries that are intended to wage war for bankers. I would like a very strong Norwegian military that can absolutely destroy any Russian or German division coming across its borders. But it has no business going to Libya or Syria or anywhere else. The Norwegian military should be of, by, and for Norway, okay? This whole idea of a European military, that's another word for NATO, and it's another word for a military that bankers can use. We want a military that is devoted to the citizens of Norway and is not there to provide cosmetic approval for an American elective invasion that is based on lies. All right? It all comes back to Norway.
You know, before he became president, while he was running for president, Donald Trump was talking about NATO we might want to close down.
We should.
NATO.
We should.
Might want to close it down.
NATO is the world's most expensive, dysfunctional travel agency. Okay? NATO basically arranges wars.
Why is it with this Norwegian politicians, for the most part, love of NATO? Can you explain that?
My bottom line is that politicians need jobs, and they don't know how to do anything else. And so NATO was a reward, a job, and it comes with a lot of perks. Comes with living far beyond the means of any average Norwegian citizen. This is as close as a Norwegian is going to get to being really rich and expensive. Okay? The problem that I have with the NATO leadership is that it lacks integrity. It's not thinking clearly about what the real threat is. The real threat, the highest threat to humanity, is poverty followed by infectious disease. It's not war. We are facing a potential of a massive pandemic, because what happens when you get a lot of refugees in motion is you then have occasions where you might have some of them die, and then the plague can come in, and then an infectious disease comes out of these dead refugees and infects the live refugees, and they bring it here to Norway. Okay? So stabilizing the world is very important. We need to move away from war toward peace. We need to move away from buying very big, expensive things that don't work and cause a lot of waste. And we need to move toward subsistence, healthy economies for everybody. Open source everything engineering is how you do that. I would love to see the Nordics replace everybody else, including the Canadians, as the world's peacekeepers. There's nothing about Norway that deserves the Nobel Peace Prize today. Okay? And the Nobel Peace Prize today, the way it's managed, generally tends to honor war criminals, not the people that Alfred Nobel wanted. What Alfred Nobel wanted was for militaries to be dismantled and for war to go away as a means of settling conflicts. And if you remember that most conflicts are not conflicts between nation states, they're bankers' conflicts. They're conflicts over natural resources, they're conflicts over the price of oil. I genuinely and sincerely believe that Norway should strive to earn the Nobel Peace Prize within 4 years by creating the Nordic Intelligence Center and the Nordic Open Source Everything Engineering Innovation Center, and essentially leading the world in demanding a new approach which says no more refugees, but every refugee is guaranteed a home with running water and free energy and free cellular there. Okay? We have a lot to pay for.
Yeah. For this to happen and to bring prosperity to the whole world, not just the 1%ers, and for there to be peace in the Middle East and other places, is Donald Trump the right guy to sort of get that started? Is he a knight in white shining armor?
No.
What are we to believe and disbelieve about what the fake news media and others are saying about President Trump?
That's a phenomenal question. And part of the problem, everything I say that I've written that's for sale at Amazon is also free online, okay? So for example, I wrote an essay called Donald Trump, Accidental President Under Siege. And your citizens can find that online very easily.
It's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon as a Kindle short, but it's also free online at my blog, phi-beta-iota.net. So it's free. I'm not trying to sell books. I'm trying to move information. Donald Trump is an accidental president. The rigged system collapsed at the last minute. Now, I don't know if Norwegians gamble, but generally the house never loses. The bookmakers who set the odds on soccer matches and so forth.
Gives you the card.
Yeah, no, but the bookmakers, the ones who set the odds, are very smart people. The odds of Donald Trump winning were 20-1 at best, 200-1 at worst. At noon on election day, Cambridge Analytica told him he had a 20% chance of winning, no more, no better. Donald Trump went to sleep, as I did, at 10 o'clock at night, certain that he had lost. Now, my wife woke me up at midnight. She doesn't like Donald Trump, but she knows that I was interested in his possibilities. She woke me up, she said, you have to watch this. And from 12 midnight to 3 in the morning, I watched what could only be called a miracle, the hand of God, okay? When Donald Trump won, he knew immediately he was at risk of being assassinated because he wasn't supposed to win. The system was rigged. Hillary Clinton was supposed to win, but two things happened at the very last minute. The first is that the electronic vote tampering that Diebold machines and others make possible was stopped. People came in and stopped it. She used vote tampering to steal 13 primary elections from Bernie Sanders. She was planning to steal 13 general elections from Donald Trump. That was stopped by white hat hackers, okay? The second thing that happened was that the New York Police Department got a laptop which more or less confirmed everything Donald Trump had been saying about Hillary Clinton as a criminal and a traitor. And that kept 3 million people at home, at least, okay? Now, he won by accident. Is he a knight in shining armor? No. Is he the one guy that the deep state fears and the one guy that could destroy the deep state? Absolutely, resoundingly, yes. And that's why I've been trying to help Donald Trump for the last several months. I've written a speech for him. It's called The Speech. And it's available on Kindle, and tonight I'll try and post it free online. But it's a speech that begins with an Electoral Reform Act, which is what I have been working on for many years. An Electoral Reform Act would destroy the two-party tyranny and create evidence-based governance. It would stop all government borrowing. It would have national health insurance with a price list. It would stop the CIA drone assassination programs. It would end all American support for dictators. It would end all American support for Israel. Now, people need to understand the power of Israel in the United States is not based on Jewish voters. There are only 9 million Jewish voters in the United States of America. The power of Israel is based on bribery and blackmail. So yes, I think Trump can do this, but I'm not sure he will.
So you're basically saying that no matter what we think about Trump, be it his hairstyle or his womanizing or his shutting down the borders, no matter what we think about those things, what we need is actually a bull in a china shop kind of guy.
I love that analogy. Bull in a china shop is very, very good. Let me go back to a phrase that we've all heard. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, okay? Now, George Soros, with his color revolutions, which has basically been putting fascists in place of communists, George Soros is trying to destabilize America and have a violent American spring. And the media is trying to impeach Donald Trump, and the banks are about to crash the economy. We've got a lot of bad things going. But what I have found that resonates when I talk to my progressive American colleagues, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Soros and others have been trying to reignite a race war between whites and blacks, and they've been trying to do everything they can to distract us from the one clear fact that has emerged in this last American election, which is that the common enemy for all people, Norwegians, Germans, French, Americans, the common enemy for all people is the deep state that starts with the Rothschilds and the banks and then goes down through the corrupt political systems in every country. These elections are all frauds. The fix is in and the decision's already made, and then goes down through the corporations and the media, okay, and the academy. A lot of universities now are cheats. They're giving a poor education. They're just going through the motions. They're not teaching their students how to think critically and so forth. So Donald Trump is the enemy of the deep state. Therefore, he is our friend. Bull in a china shop. This is good because China is very expensive and wasteful. It's time we tear down the china shop and create a soup kitchen for the 5 billion.
What are the chances that Trump will actually accomplish what he's attempting to do?
Well, first off, Trump is confused right now. He's attempting to do a lot of good things, but he doesn't have a grand strategy. And he doesn't have my vision for stabilizing the world with open source everything engineering. The chances of Donald Trump saving the world are exactly the same as the chances of Donald Trump winning the election.
Okay.
20 to 1 to 200 to 1.
Okay.
But he won.
He did win.
And we can save civilization.
So to bring our conversation to a sort of close here, I'd just like to refer to you that this morning I was listening to Norwegian radio, NRK, and
The source of all truth.
Yeah, the source of all truth. And there was a big story about Donald Trump and that they found his income return
For 1 year.
For 1 year, and that he paid like 38 million or something. And they're all now up in arms, the fake news media, they're all up in arms in Norway as well.
Well, let's point out, he paid 38 million.
Yeah, he did.
Halliburton doesn't pay taxes.
You know, that might be or might not be a big issue. But I'm sort of posing a question to you. It might be a rhetorical question. Should the citizens of Norway and the citizens of the world of the United States, should they be concerned about issues like this instead of being concerned about how the deep state works and what Trump actually could accomplish as a bull in a china shop to rid the world of corrupt politicians and the bureaucracies that support them? What should we be concerned about?
We should not be concerned about any attack on Donald Trump, period. He's the legitimately elected president of the United States, and this is driving the deep state crazy. I mean, they tried to flip the Electoral College with lies about the Russians hacking the election. And I am one of 30 people who defeated those lies. I ripped John Brennan's head off, the director of the CIA, and spit down his throat with the truth on Russia Today and on many other channels. Okay? This tax return is from 1997, and it was released apparently by his very angry former wife, Marla Maples. Okay? Whether Donald Trump has paid taxes or not is irrelevant. It's a theatrical issue seeking to distract attention from the fact that he is the bull in the china shop that could break down the entire deep state. Let me also point out to everybody that most rich people in the United States do not pay taxes. Most corporations and banks do not pay taxes. The system is rigged so that it's paid for on the backs of the little people.
Is this part of the reason why the Fed and the Internal Revenue Service was created?
Well, they were created. That's a brilliant observation. The Federal Reserve and the CIA and the Internal Revenue Service were all created by Wall Street, which works for the City of London. Okay, they were created in order to shift the financial burden to the small people and relieve the banks. Now, what Donald Trump has the capability of doing, if he does an Electoral Reform Act, he destroys the two-party tyranny. If he creates the Trump channel with Pollmole, P-O-L-L-M-O-L-E, if he creates the Trump channel as a massive... See, here's a quick vision for how Donald Trump could educate the public instead of the main media. The public has a question about agricultural policy. That question comes in. It goes to exactly the right person who then does a 7-minute YouTube. And that YouTube is then plugged into a mosaic that is openly available. And all these questions come in and all these answers go out, and it's a direct two-way channel. And then you put on top of that sense-making tools so the citizens can see that the USS Gerald Ford doesn't work despite its cost. They can see that 2/3 of our Navy aircraft cannot fly today for lack of spare parts and maintenance. They can begin to see all of the waste. What we have not had up to this point is 21st century internet-based education, intelligence, and research. So I think your citizens should focus on the fact that the common enemy of all good people that simply want to have a life and be happy, the common enemy is the deep state that runs from the Rothschilds and the banks through the corrupt political parties to the mainstream media that lies, and then down to the corporations that manage the agricultural, medical, military, and other complexes. If you want to be free, you got to learn how to think for yourself.
With that, I thank you so much.
Oh, it's my great, great honor to be here.
I hope you enjoy the stay in Norway.
Well, I will. And maybe they'll ask me for an interview after they see that everyone else has interviewed me.
Thank you.
My honor.